I knew something was wrong the moment she smiled too wide. My name is Clara Whittaker. I'm 64 years old, and I've learned to listen when my body tells me to sit still and wait. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sky looks too clean to trust. Late summer. Cicadas outside. A pot roast in the oven, filling the house with rosemary and onions. The living room smelled like lemon polish and heat from the west-facing window. We were having brunch. Not a holiday. Not a birthday. Just family time, as Julia put it in her group text with too many exclamation points. I was sitting at the long oak table that used to belong to my grandmother. One of the legs still squeaks when someone leans on it too hard. Julia hated that table. Said it didn't match the rest of the space. Still, she used it. For optics, probably. There were 5 of us. Julia, my son Daniel, her mother Margaret, and their little girl, my granddaughter, who was watching cartoons in the other room with a plate of grapes. Everything looked normal. But then Julia brought me a drink. It was pale pink, almost clear, in a tall glass that had been chilled. I saw condensation sliding down the side. A sprig of rosemary floated at the top. There was a curl of citrus peel, too. Grapefruit, maybe. Special for you, she said. It's light. Something calming. She smiled like she always did. Perfect, rehearsed. The kind of smile you'd see on a real estate flyer. I looked at the glass. Then I looked at her. And something in me, I don't know what to call it. Instinct. Aging. A mother's second heart, told me not to drink. I'd seen that glass before. Not the literal one. But the moment. A gift handed too softly. A look that held just a second too long. The way her voice had a sweetness with edges. Julia didn't wait to see me sip. She turned away too quickly. But not before her eyes flicked sideways. Just once. Toward her mother. That's when I felt it. The flicker. That tiny electric thread under the skin. The one that wakes up only when something isn't right. Around me, the others were chatting about something shallow. House renovations. Summer camps. I couldn't hear them anymore. I watched Julia's hand brush against Margaret's. A whisper passed. A low laugh. Daniel didn't notice. He was laughing about something on his phone. And I didn't laugh. I reached out. Slowly. Quietly. I switched the glasses. Julia's drink was still untouched, still sitting in front of her mother. Margaret hadn't noticed. She was busy adjusting her scarf, bragging about her wine collection, mentioning Napa Valley like it was her hometown. No one saw me. Not even Julia. The glass meant for me was now in front of the same woman who once said I brought down the energy at her daughter's bridal shower. The same woman who never said thank you, even when I helped clean up after her dinner parties. Who once introduced me to a guest as Daniel's biological mother, like I was a footnote. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just folded my hands in my lap, smiled faintly, and waited. Outside, the wind picked up. The kitchen window rattled just slightly. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed like static. Julia glanced my way once or twice. I felt it, even if I didn't return the look. She was watching. Expecting. Calculating. But I didn't drink. I dabbed my lips with a cloth napkin. I commented on the lighting. I asked Margaret about her marble countertops. And I waited. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the second hand twitching like a heartbeat. 35 minutes passed. Margaret was halfway through a sentence about her new backyard pergola when she stopped mid-word. Blinked. Touched her forehead. Then tried again. Her voice caught on the next syllable. She laughed. A short, airy thing. Must be the wine, she said, though she'd barely had any. Julia stiffened. Not visibly. But I saw it in the corners of her mouth. Margaret reached for her water. Her fingers missed the glass. Just barely. She looked confused. Then flushed. Bright red, creeping up her neck. Are you all right? Daniel asked. She nodded, too fast. Then came the stammer. The room, it's spinning, she said. The words tumbled out like marbles across tile. Julia stood up. Her chair scraped loud against the floor. Her eyes darted to the drinks. To me. To her mother. To me again. I just sat still. The glass was still in front of Margaret. Empty now. Mine, still full. Still untouched. Daniel called for help. Julia fumbled with her phone. Margaret clutched the table, trying to breathe through her nose. Her lips pale. Her eyes wide. Her body slowly curling inward like paper in a flame. And I didn't move. I didn't scream or flinch or gasp. I just stayed exactly where I was. My hands folded. My knees steady. And I thought to myself, I should have trusted that flicker years ago. I should have listened to my body the first time I felt it in her presence. Because deep down, I knew. This wasn't the first glass she poured with a smile. It was just the first one I didn't drink. I sat still, hands folded, still holding the glass. The glass that was meant to erase me. Some nights, I still dream of that little one-bedroom apartment. Not the version I showed guests, cleaned up and sweet-smelling, but the one as it really was. Cluttered. Dim, warm with too many blankets and the scent of laundry detergent clinging to everything. That apartment held my entire world. Me and Daniel. Just the two of us. The winter after his father died was the coldest I can remember. I had a bad radiator, a leaky faucet, and no backup plan. We pushed the twin bed against the wall to make more room. On the nights the pipes groaned, we'd sleep side by side with socks on our hands and old coats draped over the blankets like armor. He was 12. All elbows and heart. I used to wake up early to make him oatmeal. The cheap kind, in bulk, with cinnamon I stole from the diner I worked at. I worked mornings at that diner. Nights at a hotel laundry. I used to fold sheets in silence while the industrial dryer rattled like a train behind me. Daniel never complained. Not once. Even when I couldn't buy him new shoes. Even when I forgot picture day. Even when I made spaghetti 3 nights in a row. He used to wait for me at the bus stop after school. Just stood there, holding his backpack with both straps, smiling like I'd just come back from war. Don't worry, Mama, he said once, while helping me fold towels on the bed. When I grow up, I'll take care of you. You won't have to work at night anymore. He looked so sure. So proud. As if saying it made it real. I remember the lamp flickering beside him. The way his fingers shook a little from the cold, but he still tried to fold each towel the way I taught him. I wanted to freeze that moment. Bottle it. Bury it deep somewhere safe. It's funny what we keep. In a box at the back of my closet, I still have that dish towel. The one he folded all wrong, corners uneven, edges frayed. I never washed it again. Back then, we were close. Closer than most. When the world shrank around us, we leaned in. We whispered jokes under covers, counted coins in a jar, made a game out of not turning on the heat. I thought that kind of closeness could outlast anything. I really did. When Daniel got older, things changed, of course. Teenagers stretch away from you, and you have to let them. That's the deal. But even as he grew, he always checked in. He brought me flowers on random Tuesdays. He texted photos of things he cooked, bad lasagna, burnt chicken, and asked if it looked right. He never forgot my birthday. He sent me audio messages of his voice just saying goodnight. And every single time, I thought to myself, this boy, he kept his promise. I held on to that. Through every hard thing that came after, losing the apartment, moving in with my sister for a while, starting over in a new job, I told myself, it's okay. Daniel's going to be there. He always is. Even when he moved across the city, even when the calls came less often, I blamed the commute, the stress, the adulting. I never thought for a second it meant anything deeper. Because Daniel wasn't just my son. He was my anchor. I still remember the day he told me he'd met someone. It was in early spring. The air smelled like wet cement and daffodils. We were sitting in my tiny kitchen, the one with the uneven tiles and the chipped green kettle that wheezed when it boiled. He had that look on his face. The same one from when he won a middle school art prize. Eyes soft, voice careful, as if saying her name out loud might change something. She's different, he said. And I believed him. He was glowing. I didn't ask too many questions. I wanted to. But I didn't. Because I wanted to meet her first. I wanted to like her for him. I wanted this to be the start of something new. Something we'd both get to share. I even baked a cake. Chocolate with orange zest, his favorite since age 8. I scrubbed the apartment until my knees ached. Bought a new table runner. Lit a vanilla candle I'd been saving since Christmas. When she walked in, Julia was all teeth and compliments. She kissed my cheek, called me Miss Clara, and said the apartment was so homey. I remember her eyes scanning the room. Lingering on the kettle. On the photos. On the empty wall where I'd meant to hang art but never did. I tried to ignore the flicker in my chest. Told myself I was being silly. Too sensitive. Overthinking. She asked for seconds of my stew. Praised the seasoning. Said I was adorable for still hand-washing dishes. Daniel looked so happy. So proud. Like he had found something precious and was showing it off. And I smiled. Because that's what you do. When someone walks into your child's life and they light up like you haven't seen in years. You smile. Even if something inside you is whispering. Be careful. Even if you feel, for just a moment, like your name has already begun to fade in their mouth. I didn't listen to that voice. I smiled, served more stew, poured more wine, and told myself this was what letting go with grace looked like. But that night, as I rinsed the dishes in my tiny sink, I looked at the 2 forks they'd left on their plates. Still touching. Still warm. And I wondered if I'd just served the first course of something I wouldn't be invited back to. I used to think that if you loved someone enough, they could never forget you. She walked in wearing pale blue. The kind of blue that photographs well, soft enough to seem kind, bright enough to be remembered. I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of beef stew that had simmered all afternoon. The room smelled like thyme and browned onions. Steam curled into the warm kitchen light. Daniel opened the door and called out, "Mom, this is Julia." His voice had that lift at the end, the kind that hints at hope. At pride. I turned, wiping my hands on a dish towel. She was already smiling. That was the first thing I noticed. Her smile arrived before she did. Perfect teeth. Even. White. Just wide enough. But it didn't quite touch her eyes. Still, I smiled back. That's what mothers do. We make room. She stepped forward, hand extended. "Miss Clara," she said with a brightness that felt rehearsed. "It smells amazing in here." Her nails were perfectly painted. Pale pink. Her coat smelled faintly of expensive perfume, citrus and musk. Not overwhelming. Just calculated. I remember noticing the way Daniel looked at her. Like she was a lottery ticket that had finally paid out. "Come sit," I said, pulling out the chair with the least wobble. I had set the table with the good dishes. The ones with the tiny chip I always turned toward me. The cloth napkins. The glass pitcher for water with lemon slices floating like little suns. Julia looked around the room like she was absorbing a story she already knew the ending to. "This place is so cozy," she said. She dragged out the word just enough to make it echo. I nodded. "I like it." She touched the doily on the end table. Picked up a framed photo of Daniel at age 5. The one where his 2 front teeth were missing and his hair stuck up in every direction. "Oh my God, look at that face," she cooed, turning it to Daniel. He laughed, cheeks flushed. I served the stew. Fresh parsley on top, slices of sourdough on the side, toasted just right. She took one bite and moaned. "I swear, this is better than anything I've had in a restaurant." I thanked her. Quietly. Daniel beamed. "She makes this every time someone's sick. I lived on this stuff in college." Julia placed a hand on his arm. "So that's why you've been holding out on me." We talked. About books. Food. Weather. She had a way with conversation. Smooth. Quick. Just the right amount of self-deprecation to make you feel like she wasn't trying. But there were little things. Like when I mentioned I worked in school administration, she tilted her head and said, "Oh, I wouldn't have guessed that. You seem softer." Or when I brought out dessert, just store-bought lemon bars, nothing special, she said, "Oh, how charming," and blinked a little too long. She didn't eat more than a nibble. At one point, she asked to use the restroom. I heard the cabinet in there open and close. There's nothing in that cabinet but Band-Aids and old lotion. When she came back, she looked at the family photo wall for a long time. Didn't ask any questions. Just stared. After they left, I stood in the doorway for a few extra seconds. The air still smelled like her perfume. I picked up her water glass. The lipstick mark was perfect. Not a smudge. Not a sip missing. She hadn't touched it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because anything bad had happened. She'd been polite. Funny. Complimentary. But I couldn't shake this feeling that I'd just watched a screen test. Like she was trying on nice to see how it fit. Like she'd memorized kindness the way someone memorizes a speech. I kept going over her words. The compliments. The laughter. The tone. There was nothing I could point to. Nothing that would sound like anything but nerves or personality. But I felt it. In my gut. The way you feel a storm coming hours before the clouds arrive. Daniel texted me later that night. She really liked you, he said. I stared at that message for a long time. I wanted to believe it. For him. For me. For the fragile little thread still tying us close. So I replied, she seems lovely. But something about the way she looked at my home, the way she said, cozy. It didn't sound like admiration. It sounded like warning. Some compliments don't warm you. Not because of the words. But because of the eyes behind them. The first gift was wrinkle cream. Wrapped in gold tissue paper, placed carefully inside a white gift bag with a ribbon handle. There was a handwritten card taped to the jar. In Julia's neat, looping cursive, it read, "You're beautiful just as you are. But this helps." It was Christmas. The year Daniel and Julia got engaged. We were at their condo, modern and spotless, with dimmable lights and a smart speaker playing jazz no one was really listening to. They had a tree in the corner. All silver and white, no color. No popcorn garlands or crooked handmade ornaments like Daniel used to bring home in second grade. Just aesthetics. She handed me the gift with both hands, like it was something sacred. "I swear by this," she said. It changed my skin. I smiled, because I didn't know what else to do. The room was watching. Daniel looked proud. Like he'd married someone thoughtful. Later that night, I sat in my guest room and turned the jar over in my hands. The label was in French. The lid clicked shut with a soft snap. It smelled like chemicals and roses. I didn't use it. The next time, it was a book. A bright teal paperback titled, "Getting Tech Savvy After 60." Inside was a note that read, "I thought of you when I saw this." She said it with a laugh. "Light. Don't worry. It's super easy. I can help you set up Google Docs sometime." We were standing in my kitchen. I had just pulled muffins from the oven. Blueberry. Still steaming. The book was placed beside them like another side dish. Daniel wasn't home. He was stuck in traffic, she said. So it was just us, surrounded by the smell of baked sugar and the ticking of the wall clock above the fridge. She flipped through the book, showing me chapters. "This one teaches you how to save things in the cloud," she said, like she was reading to a child. I nodded. I'd been using Google Docs for years. But again, I said nothing. Because it wasn't worth the discomfort that would come if I pushed back. Julia didn't yell. She didn't scold or correct. She smiled and offered you help. Help you hadn't asked for. Help that, over time, made you feel smaller than you'd realized. I kept all the gifts. Stacked in a drawer in my bedroom. Still wrapped. Still untouched. She gave me tea once, too. A glass jar of loose leaves labeled Gentle Detox. Said it would help with sleep and clarity. Said she used it every day. Her skin, her focus, her metabolism, it was all thanks to this magical blend. I took the jar. Smelled the contents. Something earthy. Something bitter. I never brewed it. There were more gifts. A Himalayan salt lamp. A silk eye mask. A scented candle called Stillness. Every item suggested something. That I was old. That I was slow. That I needed fixing, smoothing, detoxing, quieting. Always wrapped beautifully. Always presented like an offering. I never gave her a list. I never asked. But she kept giving. And slowly, Each little thing felt less like a gift and more like a verdict. The final one came at the engagement dinner. It wasn't wrapped. It walked in wearing pearls and contempt. Margaret. Julia's mother. She arrived 10 minutes late, escorted by a man no one introduced. Her dress was cream silk. Her shoes louder than her voice. The moment she stepped into the room, the energy shifted. It felt colder. Sharper. She didn't greet me. She nodded. That was it. The dinner was held at a rooftop restaurant, Julia's choice, of course. Glass walls. Plates the size of saucers. A wine list longer than the menu. Daniel was glowing again. His hand never left Julia's. He kept checking to make sure I had enough bread, enough wine, enough comfort. Margaret, on the other hand, never looked at me unless she was speaking past me. She spoke of Tuscany, of investments, of vintage watches, of people with last names that carried weight. At one point, between the second and third course, she leaned forward, looked directly at Daniel, and said, "So, are you sure? I mean, really sure? Marriage is a big decision. Especially when families come from such different places." The silence was immediate. Daniel chuckled. Uncomfortable. Julia laughed and changed the subject. I lifted my glass and sipped slowly. Didn't say a word. After dessert, Margaret finally turned to me. She adjusted her earring. Tilted her head. "I hope the music isn't too loud for you," she said. Her voice was syrup. Her eyes were not. I smiled. And I realized. This wasn't a woman who needed to insult you out loud. She could do it with posture. With the way she held her fork. With the way she didn't pass the butter. With the way she leaned ever so slightly away from you like she might catch something she couldn't afford. The evening ended in polite hugs. As I walked to the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall. I looked like someone in the wrong room. Like a guest who had stayed too long at a party she was never invited to. She didn't have to say anything cruel. She just looked at me. And it was enough. I didn't cry at the wedding. Not during the ceremony. Not during the speeches. Not even during the first dance, when Daniel spun Julia slowly under a string of fairy lights like it was a scene from a movie. I didn't cry because I knew, long before they exchanged rings, that something in me had already been quieted. Not broken. Not yet. Just muted. The wedding came fast. Too fast. Julia planned most of it with her mother. Margaret sent out emails with subject lines like, "Final dress code reminder," and "Assigned seating update." She addressed me as Clara, not Mom, not mother of the groom, just Clara. My name, dropped in between budget notes and florist details like I was someone she had to include by law. No one asked what flowers I liked. No one asked if I had a special song I wanted played. No one asked me to give a toast. I was given a color swatch. Champagne blush, the message read. A soft shade of beige that disappears under light. The morning of the wedding, I zipped up the dress I bought on sale. It fit fine. Not perfect. But it would do. I pinned my hair the way Daniel used to like it when he was little. Soft waves, just behind the ear. He once told me it made me look like someone in a storybook. I remember the sound of my earrings clicking together as I fastened them. Tiny pearls. Worn so many times they no longer reflected light. The ceremony was held at a vineyard outside the city. Everything looked curated. Chairs wrapped in tulle. A flower arch shaped like a crescent moon. Glass lanterns hung from trees. It was beautiful. But it didn't feel like family. I arrived early. That's who I am. Always early. Always ready to help. But there was nothing for me to do. Every detail had already been handled. By someone else. I walked around for a while. Watched as Margaret floated between the guests and head-to-toe designer, her hand brushing backs, her laugh always half a second too loud. Julia stayed inside the bridal suite. Daniel, I barely saw him. When it was time to start, someone handed me a program. My name was printed in small font under groom's parent. No title. No role. Just placement. I took my seat in the second row. Margaret sat in the first. Of course. When the music began, it wasn't Daniel who cried. It was me, on the inside. Julia walked down the aisle on her mother's arm. No father. No explanation. Just Margaret, steady and centered, guiding her daughter like a queen presenting her heir. Daniel's eyes lit up when he saw Julia. That part was real. I can't take that away from him. But he didn't look at me. Not once. Not when she reached him. Not during the vows. Not even when they kissed. The officiant made a joke about soulmates. People laughed. I smiled because that's what you do. After the ceremony, I was ushered into photos. Quick ones. Just me and Daniel. No individual shots. No mother and son moment. Just a placeholder next to the groom. At the reception, I was seated at table 6. Daniel's high school coach and a distant cousin I hadn't seen in a decade were there too. The main table, table 1, was filled with Julia's people. I sat. I smiled. I passed the butter. When Daniel gave his speech, he thanked his wife, his in-laws, his best friend, his 8th grade math teacher. He didn't mention me. Not once. I excused myself before dessert. Found a quiet spot behind the barn where the servers took breaks. Leaned against the wood, still warm from the sun. Listened to the muffled music and thought about the boy who used to sing off-key in the back seat, inventing lyrics and making me laugh until I had to pull over. I thought about the time he broke his arm, and I held him all night because he didn't want pain meds. The time he had his first heartbreak and said, "Promise me I'll never forget what real love looks like." I watched the stars come out one by one. When I went back inside, Julia was dancing with Margaret. They twirled, laughing. Their dresses sparkled. Their makeup still flawless. I stood near the edge of the floor, hoping for a moment. A glance. An invitation. It didn't come. No one said, "Come join us." No one reached out a hand. So I sat down. Folded my napkin. Watched. I didn't cry. Not out loud. But something in me folded, quietly. Like the linen napkin I placed beside my untouched slice of cake. I didn't stand up and object. I just realized I'd never really been invited. The first time he called me Evelyn, I thought it was a slip. It was after dinner. We were standing in the kitchen, clearing plates. Julia was scraping leftovers into compost. Daniel handed me a clean dish towel. "Thanks for coming by, Evelyn," he said. Then he smiled. Like it was nothing. I stood there holding a still warm plate, wondering if I'd heard it wrong. But he was already turning away, walking into the living room like the name didn't ache when it landed. He used to call me Mama. Even in college. Even when he got too tall to hug without bending. even in texts. Now, I was Evelyn. It didn't stop there. I stopped getting invited to things. Not at first. Just 1 or 2 missed game nights. A brunch that was just for friends. But then holidays started shifting. They'd host Thanksgiving and I'd get a polite message 2 days before. We're doing a small one this year. Just the immediate crew. Hope you understand. I wasn't sure when I stopped being immediate. The times I was invited, I was always early. That's how I was raised. Early means respectful. But I'd arrive and find Margaret already in my spot on the couch. The armchair where I used to rock Daniel to sleep, now occupied by a woman who wore cashmere like a second skin. She'd sip wine and talk about politics like it was theater. Julia would hover, always hosting, always watching. Daniel would greet me with a side hug, kiss my cheek too fast, then walk away mid-sentence. At one dinner, Julia served spicy shrimp and turned to me in front of everyone. "Careful," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "You know how older folks are with spice." Everyone laughed. Even Daniel. I laughed too. That brittle kind of laugh you give when your dignity is slipping but you're still trying to hold the shape of it. After dessert, she handed me a hot towel for my hands. Said something about it being good for aging joints. Smiled like she was being helpful. I excused myself and went to the guest bathroom. Closed the door. Sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the shower curtain. There was no lock on that door. I realized it was the only door in the house without one. The house felt colder than it should have. Not in temperature. In spirit. It smelled like lavender and lemon disinfectant. Like the kind of clean that keeps emotion out. In the months after the wedding, I visited less and less. And still, somehow, every time I showed up, it felt like too much. They never said it. But it was in the way Julia refolded the throw blanket the second I stood up. In the way my favorite mug disappeared from the cabinet. In the way Daniel always checked his phone halfway through my stories. The silence was polite. Polished. Perfect. But it cut deeper than shouting ever could. Then the symptoms started. Small things. A little lightheadedness after meals. Trouble sleeping. A vague fog behind the eyes. I chalked it up to age. To grief. To maybe not drinking enough water. But it happened more than once. Always after I ate their food. I mentioned it, casually. Julia nodded sympathetically. "Probably just stress," she said. "Or maybe perimenopause. You know, it sneaks up." She offered me herbal tea. A supplement she swore by. A powdered drink mix that helped with clarity. Her voice was always soft. Always soothing. It's hard to argue with someone who smiles while slowly moving you out of your own life. One Sunday, I brought over a casserole. Daniel used to love my tuna bake. It was the dish I made when he had the flu, or when he got dumped, or when he got his first job offer. Julia opened the foil, smiled faintly, and said, "Oh, how thoughtful. But we're trying to stay low-carb these days." She took the dish and placed it in the fridge. I never saw it again. Daniel didn't ask about it. He didn't ask about me. I was becoming background. Furniture. A voice they acknowledged, then deleted from memory 5 minutes later. It wasn't just the forgetting. It was the replacing. Margaret was always there now. At the dinners. The brunches. The birthdays. Telling my stories. Giving my son advice. laughing in the kitchen like she'd always belonged. Once, during a game night, she pulled out her phone and showed everyone a photo of Julia in a ballet costume. They passed it around like gold. Daniel smiled so big I wanted to cry. No one asked to see Daniel's third-grade drawing he once taped to my fridge. The one I still keep in a folder under my bed. I drove home that night with my headlights off longer than I should have. Let the darkness press against the windows. Let the silence thicken. Because the truth is, I didn't know anymore. If I was disappearing. Or if someone was slowly erasing me on purpose. It started with a tremble. Barely there. Just a flicker in my right hand while buttoning my blouse one morning. I blamed the coffee. Too strong. Not enough sleep. But then my vision blurred. I was in the grocery store, staring at a shelf of cereal I'd bought for years. I blinked, once, twice, but the boxes stayed fuzzy. I reached for one and knocked 3 others off the shelf. A woman nearby asked if I needed help. I smiled too quickly. Said I was fine. Said it was allergies. It wasn't. At night, sleep began slipping through my fingers. I'd wake at 2:13 a.m., eyes open wide, heart racing. The house dead quiet. Not even the fridge humming. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in the hallway, not knowing why I got out of bed. Sometimes I'd find the bathroom light on when I didn't remember using it. I started writing things down. Not journaling. Not feelings. Just facts. What I ate. What time I ate. Who cooked. How I felt an hour later. I wrote it all in a plain spiral notebook I kept in the drawer next to the phone. The one with the broken pencil sharpener and expired coupons. At first, I thought it was menopause. Stress. Grief delayed, maybe. But the symptoms had a pattern. They only happened at Julia's. They didn't happen when I cooked. Or when I ate with friends. Or when I stayed home and made myself toast and tea. They only came after her dinners. After her drinks. After her tea. She had a way of insisting without seeming pushy. Try this one, it's chamomile with a twist. This blends great for clarity. I made this from scratch, it'll help you sleep. Always said with a smile. Always handed with 2 hands. Like she was offering communion. One afternoon, after a brunch she hosted, lemon scones, smoked salmon, beet salad, I drove home and had to pull over. My hands were tingling. My breath shallow. My vision doubled for 3 full seconds. When I got home, I stood in the kitchen and looked at myself in the toaster's reflection. Not a mirror. Just metal. Wavy. Distorted. But enough to make me stare. Something was wrong. I went to my doctor. He checked my blood pressure. Ran tests. Asked about sleep, hydration, vitamin levels. Everything came back normal. Maybe anxiety, he said. Your age, combined with stress, it can show up like this. I nodded. But something inside me went still. It wasn't anxiety. I've had anxiety before. This was different. This felt foreign. Like something was happening to me. Not inside me, but from outside, seeping in. I didn't tell him about the tea. About the powdered drinks. About the pills Julia once offered in a little plastic container labeled Balance Blend. I just started writing more. I logged the exact time she handed me a cup. How long after that my head got heavy. How long until I forgot what I was saying mid-sentence. I stopped drinking everything she gave me. At least not right away. I'd hold the cup. Smell it. Pretend to sip. And then I'd wait. Some days I felt fine. Some days I didn't. But the notebook never lied. One night, after another dinner of Julia's detox broth and Daniel's signature awkward silence, I went home and vomited. No fever. No virus. Just a slow churn that built and built until it all came out. I sat on the bathroom floor afterward. Cool tile against my legs. Light off. Window open. And I whispered to no one. I'm not crazy. I know my body. I knew something was happening. Even if no one else could see it. So I doubled down on the notes. I printed out a little calendar. Color-coded the meals. Red for symptoms. Green for clarity. I added a section for pills. I started keeping the ones I didn't take. Sealed them in little bags. Labeled them. I didn't know why I was doing it. Not yet. But I knew I couldn't trust my memory anymore. I needed something to hold. To see. To show. Even if no one believed me. I stopped trusting my memory. So I started trusting the page. It started with the teaspoons. Not just measuring them, but watching them. How many she used. Where she placed them afterward. If she wiped them clean before handing me the cup, or if she left the sticky trail of something powdered still clinging to the sides. Then I began counting pills. Not mine. Hers. The little ones she kept in a glass jar marked energy. The round tablets in the guest cabinet. The gummy vitamins she insisted I try because they were gentler on the stomach. I never took them. I'd pocket one. Seal it in a Ziploc. Write the date and the label. I kept a plastic bin under my bed with rows of them, each one a tiny breadcrumb. I wasn't sure where the trail would lead. But I knew I had to start somewhere. So I bought a spiral notebook. Hardcover. Navy blue. The kind with a pocket in the back for receipts or regrets. I didn't write long sentences. Just facts. Times. Descriptions. What I ate. How much. Who served it. How I felt afterward. Julia never noticed me writing. She noticed everything else, wrinkles, slouched shoulders, missed words in conversation. But she never asked what was in my purse. Or what I was scribbling down when I said I needed to check my phone. Sometimes I took photos. Of the tea bag labels. Of the mugs. Of the powder dusted along the inner rim of my cup. Sometimes I swapped mugs. If she poured 2 identical cups, I'd wait. Wait for her to turn her back. Then quietly move hers into my spot. Push mine across the table to her. She never drank it. Not once. That told me something. I began memorizing the patterns. How often she offered something calming, almost always when we were alone. How quickly Daniel disappeared from the room. How the symptoms came in waves after I drank but faded when I declined. At first, I didn't say no. Just nodded. Held the cup. Let the steam fog my glasses. Pretended to sip. Then I'd pour it into the kitchen sink when she wasn't looking. Or into the potted fern by the window. Once, into my thermos, then sealed it for testing I never got around to doing. But the point wasn't proof. Not yet. The point was pattern. Julia had a way of asking how I felt that sounded like a statement. You're feeling better now, right? Not, how are you? Not, are the symptoms gone? But, you're better now. Soft. Final. Framed like care, but edged like control. The way she looked at me when she said it, it wasn't concern. It was confirmation. And I never argued. I nodded. I let her believe the fog in my eyes meant I didn't notice. The truth was, I was noticing everything. How many pills were missing from the container between one visit and the next? How the tea flavors rotated with strange precision. How she always offered ginger peach the days I mentioned feeling tired, and hibiscus mint when I didn't. I even started weighing myself after every visit. I bought a scale that tracked ounces. The smallest changes. I kept a record. Not because I was worried about my weight, but because I needed something solid. Something quantifiable. Numbers don't forget. I wore the same cardigan 3 visits in a row, just to see if she'd comment. She didn't. But I caught her glancing at the buttons. Tiny gold circles that caught light. I wondered if she'd start buying me new clothes soon. Ones she picked. Ones she could recognize on sight. I watched her hands, too. Where they lingered. What they wiped. How she always adjusted my place setting, even when nothing was out of line. She'd smile, slide the napkin half an inch left, and say, "There. Now it's just right." It was never just right. I knew that now. I also knew better than to confront her. Not yet. Because what would I say? You're trying to erase me? You're slipping something into my tea? They'd call me paranoid. Daniel would sigh. Julia would look hurt. Margaret would tilt her head and say, "Are you feeling a little off again?" So I stayed quiet. And I counted the seconds between when she poured the tea and when she handed it to me. The number of times she asked Daniel to step into the other room. The words she used when Daniel returned. "She's just tired. She's been through a lot. She's always been a little sensitive." They weren't lies. Not technically. But they painted me in chalk. And all it would take was one firm gust to make me disappear. So I built a wall of data. 1 page at a time. I tracked what they thought I forgot. What they wanted me to question. And the more I wrote, the clearer it became. Let them think I was forgetful. Let them smile and nod and whisper about aging minds. Because behind my silence was a page full of things they hoped I wouldn't see. They thought I was fading. Good. I was pretending to forget. Just so I could remember more. It was a Thursday. Cool evening. Breeze just sharp enough to nudge the wind chimes outside Julia's patio door. They made a sound like distant laughter. Light. Hollow. Unsettling. Dinner was just the 4 of us. Julia. Daniel. Margaret. And me. The table was set like always. Perfect napkin folds. Water glasses beaded with condensation. Candlelight flickering against the rim of polished silverware. The room smelled like rosemary and something citrusy. Chicken, I thought. Or maybe fish. I wasn't hungry. Julia wore pale green. Hair curled, just slightly, like she always did for nights she wanted to seem effortless. Daniel looked tired. The kind of tired you don't notice until someone asks how you're sleeping. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. Margaret was already seated when I arrived. Wearing pearl earrings the size of grapes and a thin smile stretched too tight. Look who made it, she said. Not a greeting. More like an observation. I took my place across from Julia. We made small talk. About weather. A neighbor's dog. A new cafe opening downtown. Then Julia stood. I made something special, she said, walking to the kitchen island. There's a recipe I've been playing with. A pink grapefruit spritz, but herbal. I thought it might help with your energy. She looked straight at me. Not at Margaret. Not at Daniel. At me. She picked up the cocktail shaker. The ice rattled like dice in her hand. I watched her pour. 2 glasses. Tall. Slim. Thin branches of rosemary tucked inside, like little green flags. She placed one in front of Margaret. Then one directly in front of me. This one's yours, Evelyn, she said. Made it just for you. A little different. Suits your taste. She smiled. Soft. Polished. Practiced. I looked at the glass. Condensation clung to the sides. Tiny bubbles rising through the pale pink liquid. It looked beautiful. It always does, I thought. I nodded. Didn't speak. The room moved on. Someone asked Daniel about work. Margaret started talking about a trip to Maine. Julia adjusted a candle. Laughed at something Daniel said. And I made my move. When Julia turned to fetch the main dish and everyone else's eyes followed, I reached. Quiet. Steady. Certain. I picked up the glass meant for me. And swapped it with Margaret's. Just a few inches. A slight clink. Done. No one noticed. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. No, months. It wasn't anger that moved me. It was precision. Control. A quiet reclaiming. Dinner was served. The fish was lemony. Tender. Conversation continued. Margaret sipped her drink halfway through the meal. She complimented the flavor. Said it was refreshing. She took another sip. Didn't blink. Julia didn't flinch. I didn't either. I watched. Every blink. Every twitch. Every second. I let my food go cold. I nodded at stories. Laughed at jokes. Held the glass I never touched. I counted each minute in my head. Tick. 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 Daniel poured more water. Julia asked Margaret about a mutual friend. No one asked me anything. I didn't care. I had 35 minutes. That was the pattern I'd written down. Every incident, every symptom, every strange fog, it started 35 minutes after the drink. I didn't know what I expected. A fall? A fainting? A confession? I didn't even know if anything would happen at all. But I sat there. Still. Silent. And waited. Because here's the thing. If I was wrong, I'd simply look foolish. But if I was right, we'd all know very soon. If I was wrong, no harm. But if I was right, we'd know in 35 minutes. It was a Thursday. Cool evening. Breeze just sharp enough to nudge the wind chimes outside Julia's patio door. They made a sound like distant laughter. Light. Hollow. Unsettling. Dinner was just the 4 of us. Julia. Daniel. Margaret. And me. The table was set like always. Perfect napkin folds. Water glasses beaded with condensation. Candlelight flickering against the rim of polished silverware. The room smelled like rosemary and something citrusy. Chicken, I thought. Or maybe fish. I wasn't hungry. Julia wore pale green. Hair curled, just slightly, like she always did for nights she wanted to seem effortless. Daniel looked tired. The kind of tired you don't notice until someone asks how you're sleeping. He smiled when he saw me, but it didn't reach his eyes. Margaret was already seated when I arrived. Wearing pearl earrings the size of grapes and a thin smile stretched too tight. "Look who made it," she said. Not a greeting. More like an observation. I took my place across from Julia. We made small talk. About weather. A neighbor's dog. A new cafe opening downtown. Then Julia stood. "I made something special," she said, walking to the kitchen island. "There's a recipe I've been playing with. A pink grapefruit spritz, but herbal. I thought it might help with your energy." She looked straight at me. Not at Margaret. Not at Daniel. At me. She picked up the cocktail shaker. The ice rattled like dice in her hand. I watched her pour. 2 glasses. Tall. Slim. Thin branches of rosemary tucked inside, like little green flags. She placed one in front of Margaret. Then one directly in front of me. "This one's yours, Evelyn," she said. "Made it just for you. A little different. Suits your taste." She smiled. Soft. Polished. Practiced. I looked at the glass. Condensation clung to the sides. Tiny bubbles rising through the pale pink liquid. It looked beautiful. It always does, I thought. I nodded. Didn't speak. The room moved on. Someone asked Daniel about work. Margaret started talking about a trip to Maine. Julia adjusted a candle. Laughed at something Daniel said. And I made my move. When Julia turned to fetch the main dish and everyone else's eyes followed, I reached. Quiet. Steady. Certain. I picked up the glass meant for me. And swapped it with Margaret's. Just a few inches. A slight clink. Done. No one noticed. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. No, months. It wasn't anger that moved me. It was precision. Control. A quiet reclaiming. Dinner was served. The fish was lemony. Tender. Conversation continued. Margaret sipped her drink halfway through the meal. She complimented the flavor. Said it was refreshing. She took another sip. Didn't blink. Julia didn't flinch. I didn't either. I watched. Every blink. Every twitch. Every second. I let my food go cold. I nodded at stories. Laughed at jokes. Held the glass I never touched. I counted each minute in my head. Tick. 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 Daniel poured more water. Julia asked Margaret about a mutual friend. No one asked me anything. I didn't care. I had 35 minutes. That was the pattern I'd written down. Every incident, every symptom, every strange fog, it started 35 minutes after the drink. I didn't know what I expected. A fall? A fainting? A confession? I didn't even know if anything would happen at all. But I sat there. Still. Silent. And waited. Because here's the thing. If I was wrong, I'd simply look foolish. But if I was right, we'd all know very soon. If I was wrong, no harm. But if I was right, we'd know in 35 minutes. The results came back quietly. No one called me in the middle of the night. No sirens. No drama. Just a slim envelope slid under my door from the lab. And inside, a list of substances I couldn't pronounce. Benzodiazepine. Low-dose sedatives. Mixed with alcohol. Repeated exposure. All matching the contents of the glass I didn't drink. And more tellingly, traces found in the gummies labeled sleep support. In the powdered drink mixes. In the herbal teas. There it was. Plain. Medical. Unemotional. What I'd felt for months wasn't in my head. It was in my blood. Daniel called the next day. His voice was unsteady. Julia's, she's admitted to giving you some of it. She said it was just to calm you down. That she meant well. That it wasn't malicious. I listened. Said nothing. She said she didn't mean for it to go that far. Of course not. They never do. Until they do. He was quiet for a moment. Then added. She said Margaret knew. That part, I believed. The rest? I'd stopped accepting apologies that only came after discovery. Turns out, they had a plan. A legal maneuver. Something about early guardianship. A medical evaluation. A conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear about how Clara's slipping. How we might need to take over sooner rather than later. How it's best for everyone. They'd even spoken to a lawyer. Julia had copies of my insurance documents. Notes on my medications. A tentative financial plan. Drafts of how to shift the house title. In case of diminished capacity. She called it precaution. I called it preparation. It didn't matter anymore. The moment I gave the file to my own attorney, everything shifted. We moved quietly. No press. No scandal. I rewrote my will. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Daniel and Julia were removed entirely. Every account. Every asset. Was now redirected. To one person. My granddaughter. 6 years old. Born with her father's eyes, but not his silence. It's locked in trust. She can only access it if she chooses a path away from them. If she learns to see people as they are. Not as they pretend to be. That clause was the last thing I added. It wasn't spite. It was protection. Not for me. But for her. Julia never reached out again. Daniel sent one message. Just a line. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I read it. Deleted it. And returned to the porch where the wind had started to feel safe again. Sometimes. The best answer isn't fire. It's silence. It's absence. It's removing yourself from their game and building your own board. I still keep the blue notebook. Not because I need it anymore. But because it reminds me what happens when you stop doubting yourself. What you can reclaim when you stop trying to be believed. And start being certain. I didn't scream. I didn't retaliate. I didn't even raise my voice. I didn't have to speak. All it took was signing one page. And closing the book. The house I live in now has no second story. 1 floor. 3 rooms. Wooden walls painted warm cream. A little porch where the wind remembers to pause before turning cold. It sits on the edge of a town where no one asks too many questions. Where people nod when they pass you on the street but don't pause long enough to pry. That's what I needed. My name is just Clara again. No, Mom. No, Mississippi. No role beyond the one I choose when I wake up. I grow herbs on the windowsill. Basil. Mint. Sometimes rosemary, but I still don't trust the smell of it. I water my plants in the early morning. Before the sun gets sharp. When the world feels like it's exhaling. Most days, I walk to the community center. There's a reading program for children. I sit in a circle with second graders who smell like crayons and peanut butter and who don't care who I used to be. They just ask what happens next in the story. Sometimes I stay late. Wipe down tables. Stack books. Listen to the quiet hum of a town that doesn't know I once sat at a table where someone tried to erase me politely. No one here knows. And I don't need them to. I sleep better now. Not because the past is gone. But because it no longer sits at the foot of my bed. It stays outside. Like weather. Still real. Still changing. But no longer mine to manage. There are days I wonder what Daniel thinks. Where he eats dinner now. If the silence between us feels heavier for him, too. I didn't block him. Didn't shut the door. I just stopped holding it open. Then, one afternoon, he came. I was out in the yard. Hands deep in dirt. Pulling weeds, pressing new lavender seeds into the soil. He didn't knock. Just stood there by the garden gate, jacket wrinkled, eyes duller than I remembered. He said my name once. Quiet. Almost like he wasn't sure if he still had the right to use it. Clara. I looked up. Didn't speak. He walked closer. Stopped just short of the porch steps. I didn't know how to find you, he said. I'm glad I did. I nodded. He paused. Looked down at his shoes like the words were hiding in the gravel. I've been asking myself something, he said. For a long time. Then he looked at me. Do I still get to be forgiven? The breeze moved between us. Not warm. Not cold. Just enough to make the leaves behind him flutter like they were listening. I didn't answer. Not out of cruelty. But because forgiveness is not something you speak aloud for someone else to carry. It's something you live quietly. Or not at all. I stood up. Brushed the dirt from my knees. Wiped my hands on my apron. Then I turned. Walked past him. Into the garden. And breathed. Not to signal anything. Not to make a point. Just to remember. What it felt like to inhale without someone else's version of me clinging to the air. I don't know if he waited. I didn't look back. Some things don't need closing. Some things were never open. What I do know is this. I'm not angry anymore. Not because I made peace. But because I stopped needing an audience to my hurt. The notebook is gone. I burned it last fall. In the fire pit behind the house. The flames didn't change what happened. They just reminded me. I don't need to carry it all. There's a chair on my porch now. Empty most evenings. Just the sound of crickets. A cup of tea I brew myself. And a silence that doesn't ache. It lives. It doesn't explain. It just lets me be. Silence isn't forgiveness. It's how I survived. Without needing anyone to believe me.